We do touch on some heavy topics, and you can always check the description for more details on this episode. The Turtz podcast and content in this episode is presented solely for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. Neither I nor my guests are healthcare or mental health care providers, and we are not licensed or authorized to provide professional medical advice. For more information, please see our policy at TURTZED.com.
Today we're going to talk about friendships, situationships, getting cheated on, and the not enough wound. He's the author of State Within Light, The Path to Enlightenment, and runs a program called Anxiety Detox Training. Keith, welcome to TURTZED.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
I love to start at the beginning, and I'd love to hear how you got started with coaching people who have experienced an affair.
Well, part of it is that my wife comes from that background where her first husband actually cheated on her multiple times. And so she's been through that process herself. But I've been coaching people for probably the last 7 years. And I wanted to go straight to the heart of some of the most difficult things that people experience and help them through the most painful parts of recovery. And there's not many other experiences outside of, losing a child, the death of a close family member that rivals being betrayed by the person that you love the most. And so it was really a way that I could feel like I could truly help people in their moment of crisis and use my skills to help them through the pain.
It's definitely one of the more difficult things, having experienced a version of that myself. And I think that's part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation today, because I think that in 2025, the relationships that we have, the friendships that we have, the situationships that we have, if that's even really a term, whether we think it's a gray area or black and white, there is a core piece of that that deeply affects us. And we also can acknowledge the fact that we may be attracted to someone who may not necessarily be best for us, that it may not be the right fit. And so I think maybe we start today with friendships and talk about building strong friendships and then progressing it forward through to relationships.
Yeah.
As we talk about friendships, one of the videos that really caught my eye was when you were talking about one-sided friendships and what it means to, I'll paraphrase, put a pause on it and not be the one that reaches out, not being the one that initiates, and really seeing what comes of that to understand the dynamics of your friendship. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that in your thought process and why it's important to understand it in having a balanced friendship?
I think that there are a lot of people who unconsciously use this strategy in order to get love, acceptance, and have friendships based on the concept of I will give in hopes that the person will reciprocate back what I am giving. And what that often means is that we're often giving to people who are takers, and then we're looking to them to fill our cup in return, which is often a recipe for disaster, which is why we start getting frustrated and resentful that why am I not getting love back here? And often it's because our fundamental strategy is backwards. So what I often encourage people to do is if that's the dynamic in your relationships, it means that we're going to have to take a period of time where we back off from all of our giving. And that's a really scary thing to do for a lot of people, because then there's a fear that what if I stop reaching out to this person? I stop asking them to go to dinner. I stop engaging. What if they don't reach out? And the irony is that if they don't reach out, that's a really painful thing to experience, but it's also revealing a truth about what the friendship may have actually been all along. So we're having to face a harsh reality that sometimes what we have viewed as a friendship was actually one-sided, and it only existed because we were giving all the time. So I always tell people that if you're going to try this exercise and you stop giving to people, most of your relationships will probably just kind of fade off into the distance. And then you'll go, oh my gosh, I'm all alone now. Or you will discover that there's a handful of people in your life that truly love you and care about you, and that it was a genuine friendship all along. So it's a way of revealing kind of a litmus test on, what caliber of friends do you actually have in your life? And if you can go through the pain of letting people go where it was that one-sided scenario, You create more space for more true friendships to come into your life that aren't based on you giving, but they give in return because it's who they are too.
It's a very difficult thing. I'd love to talk about some of the core reasons why that may happen in someone's life to begin with. But in reference to what you just said, it is unbelievably difficult. And there are so many moments where, for me, I would put the blame on myself and say, I must have done something wrong that this person's not reaching out. I started retracing my steps. And as part of having complex PTSD, I can replay steps very quickly and all the different scenarios and try to pivot it in different ways and think through all the ways that I could have messed things up. And also to what you said, I have found that I have these really close friendships and they're more illuminated and I am able to enjoy them more because there isn't the confusion. And I think for
Mm-hmm.
me, for a really long time, I tried to hold everyone into the same circle. And I kind of talk about it in terms of like a bullseye. I wanted everyone in the center. I wanted to be close with everyone. I wanted to help people and enjoy the relationship, not understanding that there's actually other rings to a bullseye. And that just because someone doesn't reach out when you stop reaching out doesn't mean you can't be acquaintances. Or if you run into them, you won't have a great conversation or say hi. But you also have to acknowledge, and for me, it was difficult. I had a lot of anger because it was not about the person and it wasn't anger at the person. I think it was more anger at myself for being in that situation, right? They didn't necessarily cause it. I was offering to help, or I was always the one initiating. And I think that idea of a balanced relationship where it is mutual, it may not be mutual 50-50 every single day, but when you look at it over the course of a lifetime, it all comes out in the wash. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, that stemmed from my childhood and things that I experienced. From your experience working with people, where do you typically see that stemming from in terms of people's behavior? Is it a learned behavior? Is it based on previous experiences or not feeling good enough?
You hit the nail on the head at the very end. All human beings at the core share a fear that they are not enough. And if they are not enough, then they are not worthy of love. So anytime we experience real rejection, real abandonment, real disapproval, or perceived rejection, abandonment, and disapproval, it targets that core wound of not being enough. And so there's kind of this unconscious idea that I am going to be universally liked by everyone and universally liked by everyone. And if I'm not, it must mean there's something wrong with me. I love your analogy of the target, and it's actually, I think, a really brilliant description. I teach people what I call relationship in a box. So what it means is once I've gotten to know someone, I am starting to understand the possibilities of that relationship, but also the limitations of that relationship. And once I know the ground rules of who someone is, how they operate, I cannot expect them to operate in any other way. So, for example, if I've got a friend who we can hang out and have a good time, but they give terrible advice, okay, I can put those pieces of information inside that box and go, this is what I know about this person. So if I want to go hang out on a Friday night, we're going to have a great time. But if I think that that's the person I'm supposed to, when I need to go to for validation, for clarity, for excellent advice of what I should do, if I go to them with that, I'm setting myself up to be frustrated and disappointed, and I'm setting them up to fail.
Mm-hmm.
So once you understand who someone is, if they are kind, if they're compassionate, if they're loving, and that's how they show up consistently, well, that's something I know I can count on. But if they're kind sometimes, but then they take these little digs at me, okay, I've got valuable information to go. As long as I put this person in this box and I don't expect them to be anything other than what's in there, I will never set myself up to be frustrated and disappointed or them up to fail. And so a lot of what people are doing is we are unconsciously putting expectations onto other people while ignoring the reality of what they are showing us.
Mm-hmm.
And our only job is simply to trust that what we see is accurate and we can't expect them to do anything other than what's in that box.
It goes well beyond just a friendship. Because I think when we start talking about any type of relationship, whether it's a parent child, whether it is a sibling, whether it is a romantic relationship, I mentioned situationship in the beginning, and this kind of leads right into that. The idea of this in between place, right? When you put a relationship in this box and understand it fully, situationships almost don't exist. And I think for me, when I've talked about a situationship, it was an undefined relationship that I was trying to put expectations on,
Mm-hmm.
that were there some days, they weren't there the others, but the fact that they weren't there consistently was really my answer. And I think
Mm-hmm.
when we look at it from the standpoint of what are people showing you, remembering what people are showing you and remembering that it doesn't make them a bad person or you a bad person, but rather this is just where two people are. It may not be a fit.
Mm-hmm.
From that standpoint, when you start talking about relationships in terms of not just friendships, but romantic relationships, does it differ in any way when you start to look at it from this more long term partnership?
I think there's a part of us that clings to hope and we ignore red flags to our own peril in
Mm.
relationships. So, for example, I'm working with a client right now who she's 2 years into a relationship and 42 years old, been kind of in and out of different relationships. And a lot of it she's recognized as her own fears of abandonment. So she's kind of pushing people away before they hurt her. But
Hmm.
in this relationship, she called me and she said, Keith, I'm in a relationship with a guy who's totally different than every other guy I've been with. You know, he's strong, he's got a backbone, whereas previous men have been kind of wishy washy and she's kind of bulldozed him. But she just found out he's been cheating on her for a year. And in her mind, she's sitting here going, in the past, I have, walked away from relationships prematurely. I'm wondering if this is a scenario where I need to get past that fear and forgive this guy. And I'm sitting here going, no, 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 no. Like, that, terrible idea, right? This is not the time to test out whether you're afraid to run away. This is a major red flag that you should not ignore at all. This is a relationship you walk away from. It's black and white. Close that door. It's shut.
Mm.
So I think some of us, when the longer we get into relationships, the more benefit of the doubt we give people, which is a beautiful thing with the right person and a horrible thing with the wrong person.
Mm.
It's how we start doing mental gymnastics to justify a relationship that fundamentally we know is not right for us. So I think one of the fatal mistakes that a lot of people make is because we're so afraid of being alone, because we're so afraid of all of the dominoes that fall when we have to end a relationship and the heartbreak we're going to go through, even if we know it's the right decision, is that we hold on to this false sense of hope and ignore what our intuition is screaming at us that deep down we know something is not right.
Mm.
And that's how people end up prolonging their pain in relationships without really meaning to.
There's a couple things in there that I think are really interesting. The first one is what I would call running way past the red flag and trying to make it work after finding out that someone's been cheating on you for a year. And what strikes me about that is that when someone has their guard up and it's been up and they're admitting that they may have cut people off too early. And in this scenario, it's very obvious that things probably should not continue. I'm not in their
Mm-hmm.
situation, so I won't say definitely, but there's a very large chance that it should not continue. What do you think about that imbalance where they're going from one extreme to the other of cutting people off way too early and then holding on to something that they should have cut off way earlier?
It's hard to know what's yours and what's theirs, right? So in this case, because this woman had a deep-seated fear of abandonment, she would allow men to get close to her, but that as soon as she felt vulnerable, she would create chaos in the relationship to pressure test, to push them away. And if the heat gets too hot, she then bails because she's afraid that that person will dump her first. So
Mm.
that's where she has to do her own healing work to understand how her ego has put in certain protection mechanisms to prevent against her core fear of being abandoned. So she can get into every relationship going forward, but until she heals that core wound of no longer being afraid of being abandoned, she will keep attracting the type of man that either she's actually safe with in the sense that she knows it really can't go anywhere, or she will bring in a good man and that will terrify her because he's stable, consistent, and ready to love her, but she's not ready to be seen at that level because she's afraid she's not enough. So until people do their own internal work to heal their original core wounds, they will unconsciously bring in relationships into their lives that are going to confirm their greatest fears and their core beliefs about themselves. So if I don't think that I'm enough, I will either bring in someone who's going to mistreat me, and then I'll go, well, it must be me. And it's because it's confirming my fear of not being enough. Or I will bring in a good person who is telling me that I'm enough, but because I don't believe it, I can't allow that love in. So no matter how you do it, until you heal the core wound, you will keep struggling in relationships because you're either unconsciously pushing people away or unable to receive what they're giving.
I've talked a lot about that, about choosing the wrong person and pushing away the people that were right. I had someone send me flowers maybe 3-4 weeks into dating because I got a new job, and it freaked me out. I was like, this person is out of their mind. This is too much. Now, 10 years later, I can look back and be like, wow, that was unbelievably sweet. And when dating two people, I definitely chose the wrong person.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never really thought about it from the perspective of confirming my belief that I'm not good enough. I'd always looked at it as replaying the relationship that I had as a child, right? Trying to heal that inner wound. When you reframe it, and as you have, to confirming something we already believe, we're always looking for proof, right? We're looking for proof of anything, right? We want concrete evidence. And it's easier to prove that we're not good enough than it is to prove that we are. And I just love that reframe of the confirmation versus I just had to replay this traumatic relationship over and over and over again until I hit rock bottom and finally realized that like I had to change, because the way that you phrased it was much healthier and puts it in a light that allows me to do the work and believe in myself versus I just have to keep replaying this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's just such a wonderfully positive way to reframe something that is also unbelievably difficult to work through.
That's really what the term karma just means. What are the cycles that you repeat positively or negatively? And for most people, they're just repeating the same negative cycles in their relationships without really understanding the mechanics of what's going on. So to give you an example, I'm working with a client right now who has deep-seated fears of abandonment. His dad left when he was 13. His mom left when he was 17. And he was just left to fend for himself. He's been in a marriage for 20 years, and once or twice a week, he kind of lashes out in anger at his wife and his kids, and he hates that about himself. But he also can't understand why he's doing it. So what I've helped him to do is to map out the cycle that he keeps repeating and what functions it's actually serving him. So if you were to map out his cycle, at the top would be that he feels close and connected and vulnerable to his wife, which feels amazing, but that's actually the trigger because it means he's vulnerable. And then he starts to feel vulnerable, so his ego starts to tell stories in his head about his wife, about himself. He believes those stories. So then it moves to the next phase, which is where he'll create arguments with his wife, criticize his wife, blow up at his wife as a way to put distance in the relationship because he can't handle the vulnerability. So then once distance is created, the next phase is that he goes to his corner, his wife goes to her corner because she's mad at him now. And then it triggers his fear of abandonment where he goes, oh shoot, I've pushed the limit too far now. She's actually going to leave. So then he panics and freaks out, tries to go get her to get the reassurance, and she's having none of it. So he stays in that abandonment feeling for a while. Once they've both cooled off, then they can reconnect, and the cycle comes all the way full circle where we reconnect, we're feeling vulnerable and going, oh, that reconnection feels so good, followed by vulnerability, and the cycle just repeats. So once you can help someone to see and understand the mechanics of their cycle, that this leads to this, and this leads to this, and this leads to this, we take what is currently unconscious or subconscious and make it part of their awareness so they can see it very clearly. That's half the battle, is really understanding why these cycles are there in the first place. What are they protecting? The second challenge is, once you understand it, now we're trying to intervene at varying stages in the cycle. Just because you become aware of something does not mean you're going to change it immediately. So now what we're doing is we're replaying the cycle, getting lost in it, and then go, oh, shoot, I fell for it again. And then next time we're going to go, instead of playing the whole thing out, I'm going to catch it at stage 5 instead of stage 6. And intervene there and go, dang it, I fell for the first 5 stages, but I intervened this time and cut it off before it got to the next one. And we're just working our way backwards through the cycle again and again, each time as it resurfaces, getting better at recognizing it earlier in the game until it eventually extinguishes. So that's what it means to break your karma or to change your cycle. It's when you are no longer engaging in the same thing because it's not serving the same function or purpose for you anymore.
I let go of the emotion of anger in my teenage years. It was something that I was told that if I continued to be as angry as I was, I would replicate a relationship in my life. And I so badly did not want that I held all that anger in. And all that does is pour gas on the fire that you just described. And for those listening who are thinking about this conversation in the context of their life, and it may not be this drastic, but to be able to work on these things. And when I first started therapy and working on this, I'd realize I was triggered 3 months after it happened. So like just being able to recognize it within a week after a year felt like the biggest accomplishment in the world. Being able to recognize that I was being triggered at all felt like an accomplishment. I should have started there because I didn't even realize I was being triggered. I was just like, these are wild emotions shooting out from everywhere. I had no idea what was happening. I felt completely out of control.
Yeah.
And so, as you described it so eloquently, that is exactly what it feels like. It's these really small baby steps and celebrating every single win. And I still struggle with it sometimes when I feel like I'm not being heard. There was a really difficult day and it was not my mom's fault at all. I poured water on a brand new computer. 2 other things happened and I was on the phone with her and I just started getting unbelievably frustrated. And while almost yelling into the phone, I was like, I'm being triggered right now and it has nothing to do with you, but I don't like the way I'm behaving and I need to get off the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And while I still struggle because I don't want to get to that place, it is a win to be able to recognize it in the moment and articulate the fact that I know that this is not right and apologize, because it's one step closer to not doing it. And there are a lot of times where that it doesn't escalate to that point, but no one's perfect. And being able to recognize it even in the moment wasn't something that I wanted to celebrate per se, because it feels weird to celebrate getting frustrated and being angry into a phone at someone who loves you. And also, I was proud that I recognized it in the moment. And even though I was frustrated and angry and saying it in not a nice tone, I really wanted to express that like I knew what was going on and I couldn't control it and I needed to remove myself from the situation. And that's not easy. It's not easy to talk about right now. Like I'm judging myself for thinking like, what are people going to think when I tell them that I screamed at my mom in, a phone call? But we have to acknowledge those things because they're human. We all are human. We all are going to have these experiences and we're not perfect. And we can also do our best to attempt to prevent those things from happening again.
Shame only is possible when it's left in the shadows. And so I actually applaud you for sharing that story, because there will be so many of your listeners who have, whether it's their mom, whether it's their spouse, whether it's their kids, have regrets for how they handled something. We all do. I do. And so as long as these things stay in the shadows, they can fester. But what I want to point out is you absolutely should celebrate that as a win, because it is a win. So what we're really trying to do is reduce what's called a refractory period. So a refractory period is how long does it take me to get back to my emotional baseline? So whenever we engage in our cycles and we get triggered and we feel these intense emotions, that in and of itself is not the problem, at least not while we're trying to heal. Those are actually perfect opportunities to practice what we are learning, to intervene earlier and earlier. But what I often do with clients, and this is what I would do with you in your situation, is I would go straight to the roots of where anger comes from in the first place, because anger itself is not the problem. Anger is actually a solution to the way that you're feeling in order to get something out.
Mm-hmm.
So when you break down what is the root of anger, where does it come from? And the answer is it comes from people's need to control something. And if something does not go the way that they thought it would, if their expectations are not met, the water gets spilled on the computer, it is frustrating. But at the end of the day, there's an element of the need for control there. And so what I often do is people present what I'm going to call surface level problems. They go, I've got to get rid of my anger. You do, but in order to get rid of anger, we have to treat the root of it, which is actually your need for control. So how do we learn to let go of our need for control, to let go of expectations that we place on other people, expectations we place on events, expectations we put on our lives, and when it doesn't reflect back to us, that expectation, we can't handle it. That's the root problem. So in many respects, we're not that dissimilar to toddlers throwing a temper tantrum. Something didn't go our way and we don't know how to handle it. And so that's where the real work is anger is not your problem. It's the need for control.
I think one of the most difficult things for me to overcome is feeling like I'm letting myself down. I will jump through hoops for other people, but it's the pressure that I put on myself that causes the most anger. And in some ways, I feel like that might be connected to my childhood. But the other side of it is that my dad would often get angry. And I don't know where it came from at 8, 9, 10 years old, but I would fight back and I would yell and scream back because, to your point, I felt like I didn't have control and I was angry about it. And I knew that something wasn't right. And so I became afraid of anger because I was doing something as a mirror to protect myself. But as a child, I just accepted the fact that I'm being as angry as he is, but not understanding how complex those situations are. And from that early age, I put a lot of pressure on myself not to be angry, to go with the flow, to do all these things. But it wasn't until I really understood all of this that I was able to say, like, okay, like I can't control that. But it's for me, the one that is the hardest to let go of is the pressure that I put on myself when I'm doing everything I can and I still can't control the outcome. Well, it's not that I don't want to let someone down. It's that I'm still in a small way, even after all these years, trying to prove myself.
Mm-hmm. Which is a very normal thing to do. A couple of things I'd love to ask you is, did you hate that side of your father?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And do you hate yourself when you see some of those same behaviors in yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first off is that there's a real sense of, I do not want to become like my father, and this thing represents me being like my father. Okay? So in order for you to have compassion for yourself, who else would you have to have compassion for?
Him.
So do you know what his childhood was like, for example?
I do.
What was it like?
His biological father passed away when he was 5. And I, over the course of the last 10 years, had a ton of anger that came out. And it really, to your point, took a lot of energy to get to the point where I had to have compassion for him. And I actually feel bad for him from my perspective, And also, I do not want to have him in my life. And those are two really difficult things for me to grapple with, but I think for other people too as well, because he did have a difficult life. And just alone having your biological father die at the age of 5 is unbelievably difficult. And so while I don't excuse his behavior, I had to find compassion for him because there's always a root cause. And I just couldn't, I also at the same time will not drop the boundary as of right now of not communicating with him.
And do you feel any sense of conflict about that?
No.
Good. Because you shouldn't. Because we can understand someone's trauma, their childhood, their wounds, the reasons why they are the way that they are. And yet, it doesn't change the reality of the person we may have to interact with if we keep that relationship. So there's nothing, compassion and boundaries can exist in the exact same place, and that's what you're doing. But what I want to get to is there, you talked about this part of you that's still kind of trying to prove it, and it's unconscious, but it's still there. There are two paths to wholeness, one of which works and one of which does not. The path that does not work is the one that most people employ without knowing it. And that is that I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to try to prove to myself and everyone else that I am good enough. And I'll do it by leading with my best foot forward. So that could be my intellect if I feel like I'm smart. It could be my charm if I feel like I'm handsome or, wise or whatever your version of that is. You go out into the world and you're hoping that the world will reflect back to you that you are that thing, and then you will finally feel like you are enough. You've proved it to yourself and everybody else. That never works because ultimately we're looking for internal self-esteem from our external world. But it's called self-esteem for a reason, meaning it doesn't come from outside of us, it comes from inside of us. So the people who find wholeness or have made peace with themselves and no longer feel like they are not enough, they have made space for all of their humanity to exist and for all of it to be okay. So for example, most people, they're trying to cling to their good traits. I'm kind, I'm loving, I'm, all of these amazing things. And then they go, but there's these other parts of me that I don't want anybody to see, and I'm even afraid to look at myself. My insecurities, my fear, my cruelty, my shadow side, so to speak. And we think that if I can just eradicate that negative half of me, all that will be left is this positive half. And then I will finally feel like I'm enough. It's paradoxical, but people who find wholeness and inner peace have integrated the other side, the so-called side that you think isn't supposed to be there. They have accepted that that is part of what it means to be human. And that these things are not things that are not supposed to be there. They are a part of the human psyche and the human experience. So am I kind? Yes, I am. But there have been times in my life where I've been cruel. Am I smart? Yes, there are some areas where I am very smart, but there's also areas where I am incredibly ignorant and dumb. Are there times when I feel really confident? Yes. Are there times when I also feel insecure and unsure? Yes. So, but the only difference is that I allow both of those to exist because they do exist. And if I don't allow them to exist, I'm rejecting half of my humanity. Mm-hmm. So the only path to wholeness is to integrate what you think is not supposed to be there.
It's interesting the way that you phrase that, because over the course of the last 2 years, over the course of probably my therapy, I went back and apologized for different things that had happened. Mm-hmm. And had some really difficult conversations to take accountability for things that I had done. And some were just me, and some were two parties involved where we both were culpable in different ways. And each time I did that, I did it not to get someone to forgive me or to talk to me again or like rebuild a relationship. I did it because saying to someone, I don't like my behavior in this situation, in the past, in the present, it's bringing light to it. And to your point, the more light that you can shed on it and acknowledge that it's there, the smaller it becomes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was terrifying to do, because when I first started doing it, I think the outcome that I wanted was everything to be okay. And what I realized was everything was okay, not because the person forgave me. Everything was okay because I was taking accountability and the outcome didn't matter anymore.
That's
And
beautiful.
that is really difficult, because in those situations, you want to go back and redo them. And I think part of the struggle that I have is that with complex PTSD, I replay the bad scenarios over and over again. And it almost feels natural to do. And I have learned to start catching myself and identifying that I'm having a moment and I'm replaying it and I need to breathe or do something to like get my mind off that track. But it's those shadow moments that we replay in our head that torture us. And there's more peace after acknowledging it out loud to the other person than there is trying to suppress it and just say it won't happen again.
Yeah. That's so beautiful, and you're rare in the sense that most people never even get to that level of awareness, and they don't have an awareness that if they were just to dive headfirst into the very thing that they want to run away from, it is the clear path to liberation. To use a spiritual phrase from Jesus, he says, "Know the truth, and the truth will set you free." A lot of people assume that means a doctrine or some religious teaching. What he's saying is whatever truth you are afraid to acknowledge about yourself, about reality, just telling the truth of like what something actually is. If you can face that head on, it will then free you up to move forward. But if you keep running from that truth, you keep, hiding it over here, compartmentalizing, rationalizing, it lingers and it festers. So people who get to a sense of wholeness within themselves have learned to tell the truth without sugarcoating it, because they know that the truth will help them to move forward and free themselves up.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're doing.
It's also the reason why I wanted to start this podcast, because I think it's often these are the things that we don't talk about. And the whole point of this was to have these conversations that are one-on-one, right? Yes, we've referenced listeners and, I've talked about difficulties to help other people understand that they're not alone. But the whole idea of this podcast is that it's two people having a conversation, and the third person should just be sitting here with us, right? Listening in the context of this conversation, because there's so many things that we experience in life that we hold shame around. And it's talking about them and bringing them to light that not only frees us from them, but also connects us. And so while we were talking about friendships and situationships and being cheated on in relationships and these inner wounds, like this is what it's really about, and learning to find that place of acceptance. And it's not easy, to your point. And also putting in the work does make a difference. And it's not an overnight thing. To your point with the stories that you've told from clients that you've worked with, it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy to really think through them. And there were times where I'd leave therapy feeling worse than I did when I started the session. And I'm like, I need another session this week because I feel worse uncovering this thing that we just talked about than I did before I even knew it existed. So I just want to bring that to light, because it really is important that it's not always up. There are more times where you're going down to figure out, but then when you do go up, it's not one step, it's 10. And I think that is really important to note, just from my experience. As someone who's working with people going through these things, like, how do you see that for them?
The way I would describe it in spiritual terms is that you have to descend before you can ascend, and then that's prerequisite for transcending. in order for us to break our cycles, that's half the battle. We're getting past the negative things that we're doing that are adding to our shame, our guilt, complications in our lives that we don't really want, behaviors that we're not proud of. It is 100% possible to eradicate those if you target things at the roots. So in my experience, people come to you, and this is true in therapy, they come to you and they tell you a story, or they have a problem that's going on in their lives. The problem itself is almost never the real problem. I'm of the opinion that most people are reasonably intelligent, and what it means is that if they were able to figure out what was truly going on, their analytical mind would have already figured it out. So what most people are struggling with is what is buried in the subconscious, which means that they don't have access to it. And so oftentimes a therapy, this is my one frustration with therapy, is that therapy is often helping you try to solve it at the problem level, but they're not helping you to understand how your ego actually works in a mechanical level. Why does your ego keep bringing up the past again and again? What purpose is that serving? Why is your ego protecting you from seeing that your core wound is a fear of not being good enough or of abandonment, but then it creates all of these layers on top of it to obscure that fear? So therapy, in my opinion, or change, I should say, doesn't necessarily have to be a long process if you're ready to understand how the mechanics of the ego actually work in your life. So I often say to people, if I'm working with a client for more than a couple of months, one of two things is wrong. Either one, I'm not very good at my job, or two, they're not following through. Because if I can help them to see the underlying layers that they're currently obscured to them, this other stuff at the surface level automatically takes care of itself. But most people are just spending their time solving the problem of the moment, the problem of the year, as opposed to fundamentally changing the game. I also wanted to share one story with you that might be interesting for you and your audience. There is a big difference to me between guilt and shame. So guilt is whenever I do something that I know deep down it's out of alignment. I don't want to treat people that way. I felt bad that I did this. Those are little cues that are saying something is out of alignment in the way that you're either thinking, feeling, or living. Shame is when we attach our mistakes to our self-identity. It's instead of I did a bad thing, it's I am a bad person. It's linked to who we are. So a few years ago, I used to be a COO at a company, and we had this customer service team. And we had a woman that they had to interact with from another company that was just rude and difficult and condescending every time she would talk with our people. So this went on for a couple of months, and the team would always say, like, gosh, she's so hard to work with. She's so difficult. And I just kind of let it ride. Well, one day I was walking by the desk of one of our customer service teams, and she was on the phone with this woman. And so I'm hearing our customer service girl, who couldn't be more sweet and kind, trying to be helpful and patient. And this woman was just berating her, belittling her, being rude to her. And I didn't have time to even think. And I walked over to the phone and I put it on speaker. And I said to the woman very aggressively, I said, I won't share her name here, but I said, so-and-so, we are so tired of the way that you treat our people. You are rude. You are condescending. We are done. And I hung up the phone. Now, the old Keith would have gone, oh no, like, what have I done? Like, I just acted like a complete fool. I was cruel to this lady. And I would have immediately gone into shame. But I was able to, I understand how my ego works now. And so I thought, okay, what's my ego really afraid of? And I was actually afraid of how that woman would perceive me now. Will she think that I'm, impulsive, rude, power hungry, right? All of these negative things that she could potentially think about me based on this interaction. So I had to sit there for a moment. I go, what if I don't need to fix this at all? What if I just need to sit with my discomfort and not turn this into shame like I have historically done? So I just sat with it and allowed myself to go, is it okay that she may have a terrible opinion of me? Can I live with that? Yeah, I can. So the old Keith would have wanted to go into fix mode and call, somebody and try to smooth things over. And I just sat with the discomfort because I knew that this was actually about my own ego more than it was the actual situation. That is what it means to transcend our ego. It's become aware of what our ego is doing, why it's doing it, and then make a different choice, even though it feels very uncomfortable. And if we do that even a handful of times, we start to get quick wins to see, oh, there's a way to rid myself of the part of me that is so sensitive. There's a way to rid myself of the part of me that's so easily offended, that's hurt by people, that is so afraid of protecting my self-image all the time. That is what it means to transcend that part of ourselves that we don't want to keep anymore because it's actually holding us back.
It's such a great way to circle back to kind of everything that we talked about today. And I love that you brought in a work situation, because that's the only relationship we didn't discuss today. And I think that these play out at work as well. Obviously, the dynamics are different. And as you described those steps, to your point throughout this, identifying it is one of the more difficult things. Because if you can identify it, you can work on the other two. And when you can't identify it, you're stuck, because the patterns are going to continue to repeat. And I love how simple you have made that in terms of not necessarily doing it, but laying it out. Because I think that being aware of that and the framing of it and the story that you shared really exemplifies what it means to go through those steps. So thank you.
People can only operate at their current level of awareness. You can only see what you can see. But progress is made in the things that you can't yet see, right? And that's where having a really talented therapist or someone who understands the human psyche at a very deep level can pull back the curtain and go, I know that you think it's this, but that's the symptom. It's not actually the root. So you want to talk over here about your childhood and you want to tell all the stories of how people have hurt you. There's a place for that. But ultimately, you interpreted a set of beliefs and protection, put in some protections that are now showing up in your life now. So the stories are only pointing us to something that is much deeper, that is always actually even simpler than you think it is. It's just hard to face.
And because it's hard to fix, I think a lot of times that's why people don't take that first step. And once you take that first step, it's like peeking behind the curtain. You can't not continue to step forward. It may take a longer period of time than you'd like, but taking that step forward will allow you to take the next step. But the first step is truly the hardest.
Couldn't agree more. When I break down what the healing process is, it's that your whole life you've had certain experiences that were really painful. And because they were painful, your brain said, I don't ever want to feel that way again. So what is the best way to make sure it doesn't happen again? It's to keep going back to the past, to remember these memories so that you can keep your protections and your guard up. So if you break down what the healing process is in its simplest form, you're saying, all my life I have run away from pain in the form of suppression, pushing it down, sweeping it under the rug. And in the healing process, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to dive headfirst into feeling all of the feelings that I've been running from, which is going to be painful, hard, uncomfortable, and uncertain that is it ever going to end if I open Pandora's box. So the people who successfully make it through the healing process keep diving headfirst into the pain, willingly feeling their way through it. And then you're allowing the suppressed pain to process through you until it dissipates and disappears. But the people who transcend learn something far more valuable from the healing process. And that is that if you use the healing process as a training course to stop being afraid to feel pain, going forward, you don't need to live a life of fear and protection. Because now, if and when things happen, and they will, you won't suppress anymore. You will willingly feel your way through that experience in real time, and therefore you will not accumulate baggage going forward.
It's so well said. And as you were talking about it, I just had this image of like dumpster diving through all the garbage bags of all the things that I've been carrying around for my entire life. And I'm still trying to let some of them go. And it's not that you're never going to have them. But to the point that we've really driven home today, it's being able to identify that they're there and that there are feelings around them sometimes is more important than completely getting rid of them. So, with everything that we talked about today, what is the message that you'd want to leave people with?
That we underestimate our ability to transcend suffering. And there are few people that ever find that path in life, but it's 100% possible for anyone. The path to transcendence is simply understanding a set of principles and skills that have to be practiced for a period of time until they become your normal state. So my simple message is that most human beings accept suffering as an inescapable part of the human experience, but they never find another path, but it exists.
What is something that someone has said to you that has impacted your life and you'll never forget?
As I went through my personal process of descending into the garbage can you talked about, and then reascending, and then moving towards what I would call the transcendence phase, a good friend of mine who I would consider kind of a spiritual master of sorts, he said, once you realize that life is a game, your only choice is to play it.
That might be one of my favorite ones. It's very simple and it is so unbelievably true.
Yeah. Yeah.
The final question is yours. You can ask me anything that you'd like.
I would love to know, what is the worst experience that you've had that turned out to be the best experience? Because of what you learned, what it produced, that at the time it was the worst thing, but you look back and you go, I wouldn't want to do it again, but I'm so glad that it happened.
I hope this won't come off as like a cliche answer. I truly believe that everything that I've gone through in my life, I needed to go through. And there have been a lot of really not great experiences, and I wouldn't change one of them. Every single one of those taught me something about myself. And it didn't mean that they weren't painful. It didn't mean that I didn't end up crying or screaming or feeling unbelievably depressed. I couldn't name just one because it's not about the one. I think to your question, it's more about the mindset that you can work through anything, and that you really, when you dive in and look to seek understanding, you can always learn from it. And so whether it was walking in on someone that I was dating, sleeping with someone else, whether it was getting let go from a job that I didn't think I should be getting let go from, whether it was yelling at someone and learning a very valuable lesson, I don't know that any of them can be compared, because all of those lessons have changed me because I put in the work to evaluate them. And I think when you ask the question, my immediate thought went to, well, none of them were bad to start out. Like, they were fine. They ended badly, and then I had to learn from them. And so I think that question is so great because it's being able to look at all of them as a collective learning experience and not holding on to the worst or the biggest lesson that I've learned. The biggest lesson that I've learned was truly from all of them. And I shared some of them on purpose because I didn't want it to seem like I was trying to get out of something. There are things that I hold shame around. There are things that made me feel like I wasn't good enough. I'm choosing to look at all of them as a lesson learned. And I think sometimes people can look at that and say, well, you shouldn't have had to go through those things. And yes, that's true, but I did go through them.
But you did. Yeah.
I can't change that. So I have two options. I can either be the victim, or I can learn from it and try to learn something about myself, learn something about the way that I connect with other people, or the way that I talk to myself, and move forward.
I think that takes a tremendous amount of maturity to do. And, a lot of people do go the other route and they go into victim mentality, and it's a way to ruin the rest of your life by continuously allowing the past to define you. And you haven't done that.
And I appreciate that today, but I do also want to say that there was a big period of my life where I felt like the victim and I felt like everything was happening to me. And the more I felt that way, the more depressed I became. And it wasn't until I said, like, I will never get back to this place. Like, I'm not doing this again. Or it was so terrifying that it forced me into a different direction that I started to feel better. I can look back now and say that admitting that you are playing the victim is part of that ego piece. And it is very hard to shift that mindset because it is so much easier to feel like everything's being done for you than to say, regardless of what's being done to me in this moment, I have the ability to choose a different path. And it goes right back to what you said in the beginning about the client that was saying, well, I always cut people off. Maybe this time I should try to work through it. You have to accept what is and take a step in a different direction.
Yeah, to me, the path to transcendence is one of suffering. You have to suffer enough to be so sick and tired of suffering that you find the way out. Yeah. And that's what you're describing of giving up victim mentality. So in a certain sense, victim mentality actually served you well because it led you to enough suffering that you were forced to find a way out of it. And you did.
Yeah.
It all serves a purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure and such a brilliant conversation covering every relationship we could possibly think of in 60 minutes.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe or follow button because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. And if today's episode got you thinking, laughing, crying, or maybe even rolling your eyes, write a review and tap to rate. Now let's be real. This convo doesn't end here. Hit us up on socials and don't be shy. Slide into our DMs. We love to connect. Thanks for hanging with us today and catch you on the next one because our journey together is just getting started. Remember, stay curious, live authentically, and keep turtzing it up.